What is good, everybody, man? Let me know if y'all can hear me in the chat. I expect this to be a bit of a shorter show, being a postseason show, and also, man, probably not a huge one. I know it's the day after Thanksgiving. A lot of people are traveling, probably still sleeping from the holidays yesterday. Also, I know the Bayou Classic, Battle of the Bands is tonight. And there's a lot of things going on across the country. A lot of people are probably still traveling, but I hope you guys had a great holidays. Man, I don't know about you guys. There's always like this Thanksgiving hangover. I don't know what it is. Like the Friday after Thanksgiving, I am always exhausted and it just feels like the day goes by so slow. I've been getting together the show, watching football, man. It's been a great few days. I'm headed to Hammond, Louisiana tomorrow morning. I'm going to go cover Southeastern Louisiana versus Idaho, one of the first round matchups. And I'm actually, even though I think a lot of people might be interested in some other matchups, I think that's one of the more underrated matchups of the first round, just stylistically and how those teams potentially match up, especially because the winner goes on to play Samford, who a lot of people are surprised they're even in the playoffs. And on top of that, they have a seed. In the next they got a seed this year after being projected to finish sixth in their own conference, man. So listen, here's the breakdown of the show. And of course, y'all know y'all can call in 701-779-9585 or comment anything y'all want to talk about. We're going to talk first round of the FCS playoffs. I'm going to give y'all, so I submitted my ballots for the Walter Payton, the Jerry Rice, the Buck Buchanan, and the Eddie Robinson Awards today. My official ballots are already submitted for those awards. I'm gonna break them down here on the channel for you guys. You guys know I like to be transparent about what I'm looking at, what I'm voting on. That way, when the results come out, you know exactly where I put my votes and exactly why I put my votes where they are. We're also going to preview the Bayou Classic. That's going to determine the SWAC West tomorrow night. If Southern wins, they go get a rematch with Jackson State and Jackson next weekend. If Grambling pulls off the upset, gets back to back over the Jags, you're going to have a PV Jackson State rematch in the SWAC championship in back to back seasons. And everyone kind of knows, the round table. I just personally, for me, I know I understand the boombox and everything and the electricity that would be running through Jackson in that stadium. It's just, man, I like to see as many different matchups per year as I can. And I've already seen what's going to happen if Southern matches up with Jackson. Do I think PV matches up well with Jackson? Probably not. But I just want to see what that matchup looks like just because we haven't seen it. But I think it's going to be a really good, great game tomorrow. But to kick off the show, man, let's go over ballots. I submitted my Walter Payton Award ballot today, and I put Lindsey Scott at the top of my ballot. I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to anyone in the chat who are or watching this show even after it's live. I've been saying I was going to vote for Lindsey Scott for probably 2-3 weeks now. He's completed 70+% of his passes, thrown for almost 4,000 yards, 50 passing touchdowns, only thrown 4 picks, and has 7 rushing touchdowns this season for the Cardinals. And he set the new NCAA record for passer efficiency in a season, a record that's been upheld since 1993, if the NCAA record book is not mistaken. It's a record that has been held by the same person since before I was born. And Lindsey Scott has absolutely shattered every bit of that record. I think his strength of schedule, his level of difficulty transferring to a new school with a first-year head coach, having to learn a new offense, having the targets on his back as the defending champions, and having to step into the shadow of Cameron Ward. I think the level of difficulty for Lindsey Scott was more than Tim DeMoret. Plus, he played a tougher schedule statistically. That's the only reason I gave it to Scott over DeMoret. And on top of that, as much DeMoret has the yardage over Scott, and he has 3 more touchdowns. I understand, but he threw more interceptions, has less rushing yards, and he threw well over 130 more attempts than Lindsey Scott. Lindsey Scott only threw the ball 328 times. Tim DeMoret threw the ball over 450 times this year. And if Lindsey Scott would have played multiple second halves, I don't know what the stats would have looked like. I mean, there were 2 games where he threw 7 touchdowns in the first half and got benched going into the second half, and it's no fault to Tim DeMora, man. He played all 4 quarters every single game, and so I think that was the kind of deciding factor. I thought Tim DeMora was an easy second place pick, 4,500 passing yards, 53 passing touchdowns this year in the regular season, 5 rushing. And Tim DeMora set the new NCAA record for passing touchdowns in a regular season at the FCS level, a record that has been upheld for a minute now. But I mean, 53 touchdowns is just absolutely ridiculous. And then Michael Hyers, in my opinion, got the third place vote. Samford quarterback. He set the new NCAA record for completion percentage in a season. My top 3 picks all set NCAA records this year. Michael Hyers, 3,200 passing yards, 35 passing touchdowns, only 3 picks this year, had 3 rushing touchdowns, led Samford to an undefeated record in FCS play. Their only loss this season was to Georgia. Just to put into perspective there how dominant Samford was this year. And then on top of that, Geno Hess, Matthew Solka were my 2 honorable mentions. I think Geno Hess was the best, most consistent running back in the country this year. 19 rushing touchdowns, was top 5 in rushing this year. And Matthew Solka was probably the best dual threat quarterback in the entire country, and also led his team to an undefeated season, 4th straight Patriot League title as well. So those were my 4th and 5th place votes. But Lindsey Scott, Tim DeMora, and Michael Hyers were my top 3 picks on my Walter Payton Award ballot. Man, appreciate you, Mr. Campbell. Happy Thanksgiving to all y'all out there as well. When you look at these numbers and look at Steve McNair's numbers to show how transcendent of a player, I'm telling you, Steve, I was doing some research, Mr. Campbell, in terms of looking at records potentially being broken. I downloaded the NCAA record book, and I mean, the number of records that Steve McNair still holds to this day that I personally think, unless someone, like you say, a generational comes through the FCS, there are numbers that I don't know if anyone will ever be able to match or touch. I mean, the record for total offense in a season, like per game, is like 530 plus yards per game of total offense, is never going to be touched by a single player in a season. It's just, I don't think people understand how good he really was, Mr. Campbell. So I definitely agree with that. But Buck Buchanan was so difficult to vote for. I'm going to be honest. The reason I didn't submit my ballot a day or 2 prior to today is because the Buck Buchanan and the Eddie Robinson and the Jerry Rice were so hard. I had to split hairs on who to pick for these awards, but I voted for Zeke Vandenberg, Illinois State linebacker, as my pick for the Buck Buchanan this year. 100 total tackles, 21 tackles for loss, 14 sacks. He also had a pick, 2 forced fumbles, 4 pass breakups, a fumble recovery. Zeke Vandenberg loaded the stat box and was one of the most consistent players in the country. And why I chose him over some of the other worthy candidates is that his tackle for loss and sacks were some of the best in the entire country, even above some of the quote unquote pass rushers in the FCS. And on top of that, he hit 100 tackles, which put him right up there with some of the best inside linebackers in the country. And so I think the fact that Zeke Vandenberg was able to deliver the most consistent stat lines, consistent performance week in and week out on a team where he really didn't have a lot of help. Like, he had to be the guy week in and week out, is why I chose Zeke Vandenberg as my Buck Buchanan Award pick at the number 1 spot. Now, David Walker and Joe Andreessen were a close, probably 1B and 1C. David Walker, 66 total tackles, 22 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, a forced fumble, and a pass breakup, while Joe Andreessen, 116 total tackles, 18 and a half for loss, 4 sacks, 2 picks, 2 block kicks, 2 fumble recoveries, 5 pass breakups. He did it all as well. I just think Zeke Vandenberg kind of offered the best of both worlds in terms of what you want over an overall defensive player, which is why I had him over Walker and Andreessen in my top 3. John Pius and Elijah Huzzy were my 2 honorable mentions here for my fourth and fifth place spot. John Pius was my favorite for a lot of the year. He was on pace to really put up these Zeke Vandenberg stats, and there were a few games, I'll say this, what kept John Pius out of my top three is there were a few games where he just didn't produce when he needed to. Like when you needed him to load the stack box and lead his team, he just couldn't do it. And I think that also had something to do with him having Nate Lynn across from him in terms of taking some of the stats away from him at the end of the day. And then Elijah Huzzy was my defensive back pick. Like I told you guys as clear as day, week 4 and 5, defensive backs are going to have to put up generational stats to win this award. He was one of the top interception leaders in the country, had 16 pass breakups. But at the end of the day, man, it's so hard to compare those stats to someone putting up 100 total tackles, 21 tackles for loss, 14 sacks. It's just extremely hard to compare. Aubrey was up there, man. But listen, there's a few linebackers up here just to put into context of what Aubrey put up compared to some of the guys on this list, Ricky. He had 101 total tackles, 8 for loss, only 1 sack, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. So when you compare that to what Zeke Vandenberg was putting up, Joe Andreessen, who are 2 of the linebackers on this ballot, Aubrey's super talented. He's going to go to the next level, but Aubrey's production was not enough to win the Buck Buchanan at the end of the day. So I think he's probably going to be, I would say, somewhere around the top 10 mark, but I'd be very, very surprised if he was any higher than that in terms of overall voting. Let's see. Aubrey plays on the best defense in FCS. He had too much help to get the kind of stats these guys got. Exactly. And at the end of the day, a lot of these awards are, as much as some voters base it on NFL potential, for me, you still have to have comparable stats before that becomes a distinguishing factor. If you got 2 guys with super similar stat lines, then yeah, you can probably go with the guy who's the better overall NFL prospect. But when you got a linebacker putting up the same number of tackles and 21 tackles for loss compared to 8, super hard to kind of include the guy with only 8 tackles for loss when they're almost equal on total tackles. And man, Zeke Vandenberg, if you go watch his film, he was absolutely dominant for Illinois State every single game. It was just next level. So I think domination consistently also was a big key for me. And I think Aubrey, like Wayne said, a lot of his, especially with like Geronte Davis emerging at linebacker, kind of took his stats. Same thing that happened with John Pius. So it happens. But I think the top 3 for me is pretty solidified. And yeah, okay, I'll say this. It's going to be a battle between probably Aubrey and Ronnie Thomas for SWAC Defensive Player of the Year. And I agree that Aubrey has a great shot at SWAC Defensive Player of the Year. But man, Jerry Rice Award, I got Giovanni McCoy. And I'll be honest, I went back and forth on how to order these top 3 for a few days because Eric O'Neill, you could say what you want about the NEC and Long Island overall as a team, but man, for a true freshman to come in and put up 21 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, 9 quarterback hurries, over 50 tackles, I don't know if you can ask for better stats for a defensive end in their freshman year. Now, Giovanni McCoy, I gave it to him over Reese Poffenbarger at the quarterback spot due to his efficiency and also the fact that Giovanni McCoy, Idaho was, I just want to put out, I don't know if a lot of people know this. Idaho was so confident last week in beating Idaho State that they did not play Giovanni McCoy just to save him for the playoffs. So Giovanni McCoy's stats are literally from only 10 games. And if anyone watched Idaho State this year, Giovanni McCoy is probably putting up another 300 yards and multiple touchdowns against Idaho State's defense. So Idaho probably kept him from running up just the entire stat line last week when they benched Giovanni McCoy in the final game of the season just because they knew they weren't going to need him. Like that is insane to me that they were that confident in a state. Like, that would be like Jackson going in last week benching Shador Sanders because they knew they could beat Alcorn State just because. It's just, man, look, I've never seen anything like it. Bama benching Bryce Young tomorrow because they think they can just beat Auburn like that. That's what happened. But Giovanni McCoy, I gave it to him due to the fact Jason Eck comes in as a first-year head coach. Idaho is atrocious. He beats out Jabari Gibbs for the starting spot, and he leads Idaho to the playoffs after them being absolutely atrocious. And if without Giovanni McCoy, Idaho probably doesn't even sniff the playoffs this year at all. Not even close. Complete almost 70% of his passes as a freshman, 2,300 yards, 25 passing touchdowns, was the highest rated passer efficiency as a freshman with 168.1, and that's what separated him from Parfenbarger from U Albany, who threw for almost 3,000 yards as a freshman, 24 touchdowns, and only 4 picks. Eric O'Neal, by far the best defensive player as a freshman this season, with 21 tackles for loss and 10 sacks. Now, Rex Connors, 5 interceptions this year, was a great defensive back for UC Davis, was my 4th spot. And Wedner Cadet from Georgetown, one of the top defensive backs, cornerbacks in the country as a true freshman, was my number 1 pick in terms of on my all freshman team in the secondary. He was my 5th place spot. And then if you want an honorable mention, Desmond Reed from Western Carolina would have been my 6th place vote if we got to vote that far down from Western Carolina. And also you got Mekhi Jackson from St. Francis. He had a great season. I just think the fact that you had Surratt at wide receiver taking a lot of his touchdowns and targets, so they had 2 true freshmen at wide receiver that put on a stage, that kind of took away from his votes. But I think Giovanni McCoy, Eric O'Neal, Reese Poffenbarger, possibly Rex O'Connors are going to be the guys in the top 4. I would be floored if Giovanni McCoy does not win this award this year. Let's see, Colton Adams is a great player too. I'll agree with that. Definitely agree. Let's see, if McCoy doesn't win, it's a robbery. The right matchup, man. We're gonna get into that. Idaho is terrifying this year. Reese would have been my pick. Okay, and that's another separating factor is that one because I would agree if Idaho was already good and Giovanni came in and led them to the playoffs, but the fact they both took over subpar teams and Giovanni went on to the playoffs, I think was the main distinction. But I agree, if Reese led U Albany to the playoffs in the CAA or competed for a championship, there'd be a good argument for Reese over Giovanni this year. Do you think Swag? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Shador's going to win SWAC Offensive Player of the Year. Now, I think Howard will Ricky, if I had to guess, Howard will most likely win Newcomer of the Year. That's how I would say Shador wins offensive and Howard wins Newcomer of the Year is how I think how I personally see that going. As long as Howard wins one of them, I'm good. But I'm sorry, there's not an argument for a better Newcomer of the Year than Howard right now, especially with him leading the entire conference in rushing yards. I can't wait to see Giovanni in year 2 and 3. He's going to be special, T. He's going to be special. Troy Anderson got robbed. I agree, Daniel. I didn't vote last year, Daniel. That's my first year on the voting committee, but I came on the podcast and said I thought Troy Anderson should have won it last year. But Eddie Robinson Award ballot, I voted for Chris Hatcher at number 1 for the Coach of the Year award. He was 10-1 overall, 8-0 in the conference, led Sanford to their first SoCon title since 2013 and was undefeated against FCS opponents and led a team that nobody even gave a chance to compete for a conference to the conference title and a seed in the playoffs. And I think they were underseeded as well. I mean, I need to hear it from someone. I don't understand how they were seated behind North Dakota State, but I think Chris Hatcher with a new quarterback out of JUCO, he did more with less, man. And I think the reason I put him over GJ is because he went undefeated in FCS. That was the distinction for me. I told you guys I had to split hairs. All 3 of these guys in my top 3 did amazing things, but the fact that Chris Hatcher was undefeated at FCS and the other 2 weren't was my deciding factor. GJ Kinney was my second place vote. And Incarnate Word, 10-1 overall, 5-1 in the Southland, led them to their third Southland title in school history, and only the second win over an FBS team in school history this year when they beat Nevada on the road. And he was a first-year coach with a new quarterback who Lindsey Scott came to Incarnate Word after throwing 16 touchdowns and 10 interceptions last year. And Lindsey Scott comes first year with him in and throws 50 touchdowns and 4 picks. Year one after leaving Nicholls State. I think G.J. Kinney did an excellent job. And I don't think if either one of these guys ends up taking home the award, I would not be upset because they both deserve it. And Mike London as well from William and Mary, 10-1 overall, 7-1 in the CAA. He led William and Mary to their first CAA title since 2015. And also some big history here from Mike London. Led William and Mary to their first 10-win regular season in school history, man. Shout out to Mike London, hired from Howard, and he is doing special things at William and Mary. And I think all three of these guys deserve a major round of applause. Now, my honorable mentions here, who were my fourth and fifth place vote, was Troy Taylor from Sac State and Deion Sanders from Jackson State, both in my top five. Both led their teams to undefeated seasons. Troy Taylor was ahead of Coach Prime just because Troy Taylor beat an FBS school, and Coach Prime at Jackson State did not this year. But I could not leave two coaches off my ballot that both led their teams to undefeated seasons, and potentially, I got to say potentially because we don't know, but I'm assuming they're both going to lead their teams to conference championships. So I put Troy Taylor and Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, on the back end of my ballot. But the biggest difference is I thought the top three guys in my ballot had higher degrees of difficulty because Sac State and Jackson State were both ranked so highly in the preseason, and we knew what they had coming back. And both of these guys have just won conference championships. I thought what Chris Hatcher, G.J. Kinney, and Mike London did deserved a little bit more recognition this year, which is why they are higher on my ballot. But I voted for Chris Hatcher as the FCS Coach of the Year, and I don't see how you can argue, man, he doesn't deserve it. See, I'm a big SWAT guy, but Hatcher made me start keeping up with Sanford football. Sanford is an amazing team to watch some players ball out. I definitely agree with that. Hatcher got them dogs playing lights out, and I wasn't expecting them to be good. I'm not even going to act like I knew that was coming. I did not see Sanford even finishing in the top 5 of the SoCon. I'm going to be honest with you guys. And the fact that Hatcher turned them around so quickly this year, and he hit on Michael Hires too. I think we talked about this. I think it was either on the round table or one of my past live streams on how hard it is to consistently hit on evaluations. And the fact that he found Michael Hires at Northwest Mississippi Community College and turned him in bringing him into Sanford his first year, set the NCAA record for completion percentage, and turned two wide receivers that coming into the season were on no all conference, no all American list, and turned them into probably all Americans this year with Kendall Watson and those guys. It's different. I'll just say that Chris Hatcher deserves a big round of applause. That's why having a legit quarterback, man. And you got to look at Sanford too. Let's just take a look back. You got to the fact that they had Ola Duncan, and Ola Duncan lost his spot or transferred out, and then they had I'm blanking on the kid's name. He went on to have a solid career. I mean, they've had a streak of 4 quarterbacks that have been studs there, and Michael Hires might be the best of them. That's the craziest part, is that they have consistently developed really good quarterbacks at Sanford. The one question mark's been the defense, and this is probably the first year the defense has been on point. And so you got to give them a lot of credit. But yeah, that would be my picks here, just to go back in case some people are just now tuning in. Lindsey Scott is my pick for the Walter Payton Award, Zeke Vandenberg for the Buck Buchanan, Giovanni McCoy for the Jerry Rice, and Chris Hatcher, Sanford head coach, for the Eddie Robinson Award on my ballot. But let's get quickly, man, because if you guys don't know, if you guys want to talk FBS, I'm jumping on the Blitz City podcast at 7:30 p.m. Central Time with Carl Reed, Kobe, my guy from Blitz City Podcast, and Clay. We're going to be talking about the rivalry week and all the FBS matchups coming up this weekend at 7:30. So I got to wrap this up by then. But let's quickly go into, we're going to do round one, FCS playoff game, and then we're going to end the show with our HBCU game of the week, Southern versus Grambling in the Bayou Classic. But North Dakota, Weber State, kickoff 3 p.m. Central Time on ESPN Plus. This game will be out there in Utah at Weber State. But this matchup is extremely interesting, I think, because stylistically, it can look like a blowout, but North Dakota has performed extremely well against really, really talented teams, and their only losses have come to some of the top teams in the FCS. I thought they probably got the toughest team in the first round because I think Weber State is still talented enough to be one of those top 8 seeds. But this is going to come down to one thing, and I think the key matchup is going to be the rushing defense of North Dakota against the two-headed monster at Weber State and Dante McMillan and Damon Bankston at the running back spot. North Dakota's rushing defense has been allowing over 5 yards per carry, and if you allow Weber to produce explosive plays on the ground, they're going to work off the play action very well, and Ty McPherson is going to absolutely eat you deep. And that is going to be a major issue. And then on top of that, at the quarterback spot, Tommy Schuster has to be efficient. He's done really, really well. When he's on, and North Dakota is really, really hard to beat because Tyler Hoosman can open things up on the ground. But Tommy Schuster, over 2,500 yards passing, 17 touchdowns, but he has a problem with turnovers at times and efficiency. And if there's one thing you could say about the Weber State defense is that they have dogs in the back end of their defense. Eddie Heckert, Maxwell Anderson, all those guys, even Winston Reed at the linebacker spot, all these guys can produce turnovers and shut down sides of the field when they're on, especially Maxwell Anderson. These two guys have combined for 7 interceptions and 17 pass breakups, and they are all over the field. The question is, can North Dakota have anybody step up at the wide receiver spot outside of Bo Bleekwist at on the outside? That is my question mark. But I personally think Weber's going to be too balanced. The crowd's going to be too raucous, and North Dakota is not going to have enough weapons to move the ball efficiently against Weber State. I know a lot of people say this won't be a blowout. I personally think Weber State pulls away in this one. Give me Weber State 42-23 over North Dakota in the first round of the playoffs. I think the Wildcats are probably the one team from the first round that I would be most afraid to see. If they get a big rematch moving forward in the second round that I think they could win. Give me Weber State in a big one this weekend at home over the Hawks this weekend. Now, a very, very interesting matchup in Eastern Kentucky, Gardner-Webb. Now, Gardner-Webb gets the auto bid after winning the Big South. This is their first FCS playoff appearance, and everyone knows Eastern Kentucky has one of the deepest and most historic playoff histories in FCS, but this is their first postseason appearance since 2014. They have won 2 national championships, though, and this is just going to be which team gets their offense rolling. Both of these teams, we've seen it happen throughout the season. When their offenses are clicking, they are dangerous to see. But I'm riding with Eastern Kentucky this weekend due to the defensive consistency. I think outside of Ty French, Gardner-Webb has some holes on the back end of that defense, and that's something you cannot have when Parker McKinney coming in, throwing for over 3,500 yards, 28 touchdowns, and Gardner-Webb's allowing over 250 per game through the air right now. And on the defensive side, they have 2 of the most terrifying guys in Matthew Jackson, two-time ASUN Player of the Year, and TK McClendon, an LSU transfer that has been balling on the interior of that defensive line. I think they're going to give Gardner-Webb some problems up front. And if Gardner-Webb's not able to establish the rushing game with Nari Gaither, I do believe that Bailey Fisher is going to have some problems moving the football down the field and finding time in the pocket. So give me Eastern Kentucky over Gardner-Webb this weekend, 37-24, moving on to the second round of the FCS playoffs. And now a game that there's a lot of people saying this game isn't going to be competitive. And St. Francis comes in, winning their third conference title in school history, and looking to win their first ever FCS playoff game. And I put the stat in the article. Delaware has made it past the first round of the playoffs in 6 of their last 7 appearances. And I really do think people are overlooking SFU. The offense is electric. Cole Doyle has been one of the best has been probably the most underrated quarterback in the country. 21 passing touchdowns, can do it on the ground as well. And they have 2 of the best freshman wide receivers in the country right now, Mekhi Jackson and Eli Surratt. Mekhi Jackson has put up over 900 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, while Surratt has put up 13 touchdowns through the air this year. So that is a dynamic freshman duo. And Delaware necessarily their strength isn't necessarily at the corner position. Now, Kedrick Whitehead, All-American safety, is an absolute baller, but can Delaware win the matchups on the outside? And that's the issue. But when you look at Delaware on the other side, SFU has not seen a quarterback like Nolan Henderson who can get it rolling. Jordan Townsend has been great at the wide receiver spot for the Blue Hens. And when you look at Delaware's defensive efficiency, they've been one of the more efficient defenses in the country, even though they have been prone to give up some big plays. I want to ride with SFU here, but I really do think the battle-tested Blue Hens pull out a close one. I think they probably score late. I would imagine this game is probably going to be a 3-7 point game up until the end. I think Delaware scores late to move it to 10 points. Give me Delaware 34-24 over SFU, but I do expect SFU to give the Blue Hens some problems early. And if they jump on Delaware and Nolan Henderson is not clicking it at full strength, look out for the big upset here. I think someone in the chat already said that they like St. Francis. If St. Francis pulls off the upset, man, I'm giving you all the credit on Sunday. So SFU with the potential upset, but I'm riding with Delaware by 10 this weekend. And the final game of this first slide, Elon versus Furman, which I think probably going to be the most competitive game of the first round. Elon, shockingly, has never won an FCS playoff game and will be facing Furman for the second time. The last game Furman won over Elon in 2017, that was actually Furman's last playoff victory, 28-27 in the first round of the playoffs. Which team can run the football? That's it. I mean, we know what Matthew McKay can be. We know what Tyler Huff can be. They're both playmakers, but we know what makes Furman tick. I've seen this team play in person, and they are going to try to run the football straight down Elon's throat, and it's going to be strength versus strength because the front sevens for both of these teams are elite. With Braden Gilby, Bryce McCormick for Furman, they can load the box and slow it down. I mean, ask Mercer what happened when they are physical up front, the defensive tackles are clicking, and you got Marcus Hillman on the other side with 16 and a half tackles for loss, and they have some playmakers on the interior of the defensive line. Jalen Hampton, a 1,000-yard rusher this year, while you also got Dominic Roberto, just under 1,000 yards for the season. Both of these guys have 10 rushing touchdowns. The only I'm riding with Furman in this one because I do trust Tyler Huff to make a play over Matthew McKay right now. The only FCS game Furman has lost was to Sanford, and it was the one game Tyler Huff didn't play. He seems to be the spark plug of the offense, and I think Tyler Huff makes a play down the stretch for the Paladins to pull this one out. Give me Furman 23-20 this weekend over Elon, and probably I think the closest game of the first round, and I think it's the best matchup of the first round overall, man. But give me the Paladins by 3 this weekend. And the game I'm going to be at, so I won't make a prediction here. Listen, if my guy Danny, he's a big supporter of the show, man, in the FCS Facebook groups. Danny, I'm sorry I didn't put this in my predictions. Hoping to see you in Hammond tomorrow, but Southeastern Louisiana hosting the Idaho Vandals. I'm so excited to be back in Hammond this week and get to see Giovanni McCoy up and close this weekend. And it's going to come down to one thing: Southeastern Louisiana's defense. If you've watched Idaho, they're not flashy. They're not putting up 40, 50 points a game. But what they're going to do is they're statistically one of the most efficient offenses in the country. And right now they're averaging 35 minutes of possession time per game and allowing their opponents to hold the ball for almost less than 20 minutes of the game. It is unbelievable. They're so effective on third and fourth downs where they keep it short and they're Giovanni McCoy does not turn the football over and they're able to run the ball in key situations. And it's going to be up to Southeastern Louisiana to force this offense into uncomfortable situations. You have to stop Anthony Woods from running the football and Roshan Johnson, 11 rushing touchdowns this year, has a knack for finding the end zone consistently, and then you just got to find a way to get Giovanni McCoy off his spot. That's what it is. You have to get Giovanni McCoy uncomfortable. At the end of the day, he still is a freshman. Dante Daniels, Donnell Ward McGee, the leaders of this defense have to find a way to make him uncomfortable in the pocket. And on the back end of the defense, Zy Alexander, Brandon Barbie, Philando Jordan, all these guys have a lot of experience, do a great job of forcing turnovers. It's going to be up to Southeastern Louisiana to make plays on the back end of the defense. They did it against Incarnate Word. Forced red zone turnovers, kept them from running up the score. That's going to be the key this weekend, is to make this game a fight. And also, we got to establish some sort of offensive consistency for SLU. If it's quick 3 and outs, that is when Idaho is going to be clicking it on all cylinders. Carlos Washington, Cephas Johnson when he gets in there, Jesse Britt, all these running backs have to be efficient in moving the football. Carlos Washington has probably been the most important offensive piece, I would say, for the Lions this year. Last year, it was Cole Kelly throwing the football all around the field. This year, it's been Carlos Washington and these quarterbacks just being effective and running the football. And it's going to be interesting to see Eli Sawyer, Cephas Johnson, how they rotate these guys at quarterback. They bring very different approaches to the offense, but they've both been effective, which is very rare to see in a 2 quarterback system. Then also we know what CJ Turner and Gage L can bring at the wide receiver spots. They're going to have to make plays downfield against this Idaho secondary. And that's going to be the keys to the game, man. And I'm going to be extremely excited to cover this game this weekend. Highlights will be available hopefully after the game, maybe on early Sunday morning, and pictures will also be coming. Shout out to everyone over at Southeastern Louisiana for having me back for this game. Now, SEMO versus Montana. This was a heart versus mind pick here because I see I see a lot of people in the comments saying they hope Montana gets absolutely destroyed in this matchup. And I think that's a common feeling, I would say. And this game is also on national television. It kicks off at 9 p.m. Central on ESPN2. So it's in primetime on ESPN2 this weekend. SEMO coming off their OVC championship, 9-2, they have one of the most balanced offenses in the country, and that's going to be the key. We know Montana's talented with Patrick O'Connell, Justin Ford, Robbie Hawk. You have to find a way to because your rushing attack is not as dynamic, I would say, as Montana State in terms of you don't have all the wide receiver weapons, 2 different quarterbacks who can run the football, but you have the overall best running back that I think one of the best running backs Montana has seen all season long in Geno Hess. 19 rushing touchdowns, almost 1,500 yards. He has been electric. I think he's going to end up being an FCS All-American this year, but Paxton DeLaurent has been a shock at quarterback where he has actually put up a lot better stats than what I thought he was going to at SEMO. And they have 2 wide receivers led by Johnny King who can stretch the field vertically. And the Grizz secondary has actually played really well this year, allowing under 200 yards per game through the air. So you're going to have to run the football against them. And when you look at the Grizz, Patrick O'Connell and Marcus Wellnell are going to have to play big-time football. Both of these guys, double-digit tackles for loss, lead the team in sacks. They're going to be the X factors against this SEMO rushing attack. And if you've been watching the Grizz recently, Nick Nick Osmo, I believe it's Osmo, has really emerged as the number one rushing threat, which really surprises me. Coming into the season, no one was really talking about him as the lead guy for the Grizz. He's been putting on some big time performances, 740 yards on the ground. But at the end of the day, if you've watched Montana, if Lucas Johnson's playing well, the Grizz have a chance. If Lucas Johnson is missing throws, uncomfortable in the pocket, and does not make plays with his legs when he needs to, especially in the red zone, Montana looks like a completely different team. The issue here is, can Paxton DeLaurent do it against one of, I think, the best secondaries that he has seen all season long? And that is a major question mark for me. And my heart wants me to go with SEMO because I love my guy Gino, and I love what they do. But I think Montana is going to find a way to pull it out, especially at home. I like Montana 31-28 over SEMO this weekend, even though my heart's telling me to go with my guy Gino, but I got to ride with Montana here. Um, okay, so they're not even starting Lucas. I I'm going to stick with my pick. I'm riding with my head here. Give me the Grizz by 3 this weekend over SEMO. I think the run ends next weekend. Um, the run ends next weekend for sure, but I think they get that first round win. Now, New Hampshire Fordham and Davidson Richmond are final 2 games, both featuring CAA teams. I'm just going to come out and say it. I'm picking Fordham for the upset this weekend. I think with Fordham making their first appearance since 2015, they have the most explosive offense in the first round of the playoffs. Tim DeMora, we've already went over him. The wide receiving core is the most deadly. I think New Hampshire is going to see, even if they advance and have seen all season. Fotis, 1,100 receiving yards, 14 touchdowns. Deuce Carter, 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns. MJ Wright, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. This Fordham team has 3 wide receivers over 1,000 yards and 10 plus touchdowns, on top of having James Conway and Ryan Greenhagen leading that defensive front. I don't trust New Hampshire's offensive efficiency. If Fordham can get this game into the 30s, they're going to win. I'm just telling you, the Wildcats have been great on the defensive line. I do agree. Dylan Ruiz and Joshua Silver Josiah Silver have been electric. 14 tackles for loss for Silver. Ruiz has put up 11 sacks this season. Outside of Dylan Lobb, though, I don't know if New Hampshire is going to be able to effectively move the football. I agree, Wayne. Their quarterback has a cannon, but if you can get pressure on him, we've seen repeatedly, if you can get him off his spot, the accuracy greatly decreases. The question becomes, can Lobb in this rushing attack keep Fordham's offense on the sideline? Because if New Hampshire gets behind by 10, 14, or double digits, it's going to be really, really tough to stage a comeback against Fordham with just how efficient this Fordham offense is. The key is going to become getting pressure on Tim DeMoret and running the football and running up the time of possession and keeping Fordham's best weapon, which is their offense, on the sideline. I think Fordham gets the upset. That's my upset pick of round 1. Give me Fordham 38-35 over New Hampshire this weekend. And then the final game, Davidson Richmond. It's Pioneer CAA matchup. Davidson making their 3rd consecutive appearance, and I'm going to keep this short. No offense to Davidson. They're the number 1 rushing attack in the country. Multiple running backs have topped the 300-yard mark. I personally don't see how they keep this close, especially with how dominant the front 7 is for Richmond. Tristan Wheeler, Philip O'Connor have been unbelievable. They have the number 1 rushing defense in the CAA. I think they're going to shut down the rushing attack of Davidson. Give me Richmond 33-14 over Davidson. I just don't see Davidson non-scholarship league. I just don't think that they're going to have the depth, talent to hang with Richmond this weekend. So give me the Spiders in a big one, 33-14. Davidson probably scoring those 2 touchdowns late. Richmond should be able to blow the doors off this one fairly early. Are the quarterbacks for Incarnate Word and Fordham pros? I think Demoret's probably the number one pro prospect in terms of quarterback for the FCS right now. Roosevelt, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a look. It might be late round, but I think Demoret will get a look. I don't know about um I personally don't know about Lindsey Scott just due to his size, Roosevelt, and also him kind of being a one-hit wonder in terms of the in terms of his production, I would say. But I do think Tim DeMorit's an NFL prospect. He's been an NFL prospect. So I don't think this year anything's different. He has the size, he has the arm. It's just going to depend on what he does in terms of I think he's going to the Hula Bowl. And then if he gets invited to the combine, he's probably going to have to show out there on a big stage. But I would say Tim DeMorit from Fordham is Lindsey Scott, probably not. It's a little bit up in the air. But the final game, before I just get to y'all's calls and comments toward the end of the show, before I jump over to the Blitz City podcast, we got the Bayou Classic. Not a playoff game, but of huge stakes this weekend. So I talked about it earlier. Grambling, they can pull off the upset. Prairie View heads to the SWAC championship to face Jackson State. If Southern pulls off the big win, we are getting a rematch. Southern, Jackson State in Jackson. And this game's on NBC, 1 p.m. kickoff. This game, I went through, I watched some film over the past few days since the last time I've been live, just kind of seeing how I thought these teams realistically matched up. And the biggest thing is if Grambling cannot run the football, I don't know if this was necessarily close. I don't know. D. So hang on, D. I'll say this. I don't know if you can consider it necessarily a trap game because of because of how big of a rivalry game it is, and you've had 2 weeks to know the stakes of it. I don't know if that necessarily fits into a trap game. Like, what it is, and I think even if the stakes weren't there, I don't know if either team's coming in sleepwalking. So I don't know if it would be necessarily a trap game for me, but I guess it could because if they lose, everyone's going to call it a trap game. But for me, I'm hoping it's not a trap game. Because it shouldn't be. If you're Southern and you sleepwalk into this one, you deserve everything. You deserve everything you get if you sleepwalk into this game knowing what's coming and what you have to do. Let's see. Calvez could outplay the SU QB, and that keeps Scrambling in the game. On the ground, Mr. Kent, because maybe I'm being too hard because he still is a young kid. I think he's got talent. Don't get me wrong. I haven't seen the efficiency from him. If Calvez would have to outplay Southern's QB on the ground, being a dynamic athlete rather than just going back there and throwing the football, especially with how well Southern's secondary has played this year. Because you can say what you want, Corian, Harris, and those guys, man, they can force turnovers. And with Calvez being a little bit inconsistent in terms of accuracy, if you put the ball in the wrong spot, it has the ability to take it back for 6 or flip the field position, take the ball right back. So Calvez needs to be dynamic on the ground. I do agree, Mr. Campbell. I just don't know if I'd put the ball in the air with him. Maybe I'm being too harsh on him. Y'all can let me know. I just don't trust him to throw the football right now. And he may develop into a great passer. I just personally don't trust him to throw the football right now. And that's why I think, man, you got to give Maurice Washington the football. I mean, Maurice Washington, guys, just to put in perspective, is still averaging almost 10 yards per carry right now. And they still have not consistently given him the football. I don't understand. I don't understand it. He leads the SWAC in yards per carry right now, and he cannot get the football. And the equalizer, though, is Grambling's defense, especially their front seven, has started to kind of click. Lewis Matthews has played out of his mind. Sundiata Anderson has really started to click late, 12 and a half tackles for loss, 7 sacks, probably going to be first team all SWAC this year. And that's going to be important against a Southern rushing attack averaging over 200 per game. The question becomes for Southern, though, this is really kind of the first big game that they've had without Gerard Sims. They're still not getting Corey or Dylan back at the running back spot. you're going to need Carl Ligon and Kendrick Grimes to step up in big ways. Both of these guys have the talent. They both show a lot of promise in their game, but neither one of them have been the go-to guy pretty much all season long. And that's going to be a question mark. And then also, who's starting at quarterback? That's a huge question for Southern. Now, what they're going to need is, I think, their front seven to keep them in the game, and also they're gonna need their secondary to force a turnover. Like I said, if Calvez puts the ball in the air, Trey Lang, Taj Brown, Jason Dumas, those guys have to play big. We know we know that was it Jordan Lewis is not playing this week, if I'm not mistaken. So you're gonna need those three guys, and Taj Brown, Lang, and also Jason Dumas, to really, really step up. And that's going to be the key. I just think Southern is not going to sleepwalk into this one. I trust their defense a little bit more than Grambling. And I just have not trusted Hugh Jackson to pick the right game plan in the big game. So I think they're going to give this one away late. I don't see this being a blowout either way. Give me Southern 24-21 over Grambling, and they'll be headed to the SWAC championship to face Jackson State for a second time. We'll see. I want to ask you guys, if Southern gets back to the SWAC championship to face Jackson State in Jackson, does the rematch go any better for them? I think I've been vocal on how I feel about it, in terms of, I just don't think it's a great matchup for Southern. But do you guys see there's any way that game goes any differently for them? And I want to get y'all's opinion on that. It will be no different. Hell no, dope, no. Oh, man. He said no one wants to play Jackson State. Every time a team has a chance to win the West, they fumble the ball. I think Grambling is going to win based on that logic. Prairie View plays in the championship. Lawrence is the only one with any faith in Southern right now for a rematch. He said, hell no. Noah, well-rested. JSU is going to bury them. Yes. I love how, like, we're basing it on, like, will it go better, based strictly off if they're just going to score a single touchdown. Southern is not a good team. This will be a rinse, repeat, beatdown. Oh my God, man. All right, man. Listen, I probably got about 20 minutes to take calls and comments. So 701-779-9585 if you want to call in, or if you just want to comment your question, we could talk about whatever. It could be playoffs, it could be the Bayou Classic, it could be All-American, it could be whatever y'all want to talk about. Let's see. Who has the better chance to beat JSU in the championship? Mm. Oh God. Connor, I'm gonna be honest with you. Because in my head, every time I talk myself into a team, I talk myself out, because I don't think either of them match up well. I'll say PV, Connor, just because they get this week off. They get the same type of bye week, quote unquote, that Jackson State gets, and Jackson State hasn't seen them. So I'll say PV by just a little bit, but I don't think either team matches up very well, Connor, to be honest with you. That's no disrespect to Southern or PV. College football is strictly about matchups, and neither one of these teams, like, if I could have it my way, I would much rather see FAMU, Alabama State, and okay, maybe not Alabama State after yesterday, FAMU or Alcorn State play them again, rather than Southern, or even seeing a PV matchup. That's just how I look at it right now. But if I had to pick one, just because they haven't seen them and they get a bye week, I would go PV by just a little bit. But I do think Southern probably has the more talented roster than PV, and it would really come because the problem is Gerard Sims is still out. Jordan Lewis will probably still be out for the game. Kobe Dillon, if I'm not mistaken, is out for the year as well. Does he start the same quarterback? Like, there's so many question marks about how Southern would play the rematch. I think it is just too many unknowns for me to know how they would exactly matchup in that one. Alcorn, I feel, would have the best chance. Early weather report, rain for the SWAC title game. So Southern's going to go back, and it's going to be another rain game. That's it. And also, guys, y'all got my curses back. Apparently, this weekend in Hammond, Louisiana, for Southeastern Louisiana, Idaho is going to be pouring down rain this weekend. So a lot of rain across the FCS playoffs this weekend. I watched the FAMU ASU game again. I don't think FAMU would withstand a chance. Any game with Bashan McCray starting is a loss. If by better you mean they'll score this time around, then yes. If by better you mean win, you know how this is going to play out. So nobody thinks they got a chance at all. I love it. How did Holy Cross and William and Mary get a better first round matchup than Montana State? The committee hates us. I don't know how Montana State got the 4 seed, Daniel. The Montana State had a. I don't know how that. I don't know how you rank North Dakota State above Montana State in terms of seeding. I agree. Montana State and Sanford got completely put in bad situations, because the fact that you guys would possibly get Weber in the second round, it is brutal. I think Jordan Lewis is injured, Roosevelt. That's at least what I was told, is that he is hurt and that's why he's not playing. I don't know what his status would be for a potential SWAC championship game, though. That's why I was saying Southern has so many question marks, because you don't know who the quarterback would be, and they have injuries in key spots that you don't know if those players would be available in 2 weeks if that game was supposedly going to happen. North Dakota State being past chance had to come into play. I don't think that should. I mean, it should be based off a resume this year, but also, let's see, that QB change will make some difference in the score, but the result will be a JSU win. They may get the field goal this time. So out of all the quarterback, I mean, do you think, because what they have, was it, who played last week? Was it Blood, or was it or was it who's the other quarterback? I'm blanking on the name. Whoever played last week, man, looked really good. I'm blanking on his name for some reason, but when I went back and watched that game, I mean, or 2 weeks ago, their last game, he played solid. It's because Dooley, I get why he does it. He didn't really show his hand on who he was going to start, and I don't blame him at all, but it would depend. Mr. Kincaid, I agree. It depends on who they start at quarterback. And if they get to the SWAC, regardless of who they start this weekend, and let's just say they win, regardless of who's the starting quarterback this weekend, you have to make a quarterback change in turn, just because based on the perception of what happened last time. You got to give them a different look, or give someone a chance to lead the offense, because I mean, it was close for 2 quarters, and then I mean, everything just went wrong for Southern after that. So you got to give your team a fighting chance by changing the quarterback. Yeah, Bubba. Okay, appreciate you, Lauren. Stanford and Montana State got hosed. Big Sky was the best conference this year, but the voting that showed that Sac State schedule is way better than South Dakota State. I'm just going to say this. This is all I'm going to say, Daniel. There's someone on the show, and hey, it's just me on the show, that has had Sac State number 1 for multiple weeks now. I don't know I don't know what the other voters were. I would like to hear the other voters' reasoning of why they had South Dakota State at number 1 over Sac State. Because just based off of strictly resume and what's happening this year, not anything that happened 3 years ago or 2 years ago, there was no reason Sac State shouldn't have been the number 1 team in the country for the past 3 weeks at least. So the voting was interesting. Let's call Howard and have them show up as sabotage. It's because the SWAC championship was on ESPN2 this year, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know, man. I don't know about you guys. I'm not super excited for the SWAC championship this year. It would be cool just to see the environment of Southern Jackson State. But that's about it. What's good, Mr. Campbell? You're live.
Blue, okay, great show. I wanted to throw something at you. I was reading on Sports Illustrated, and one of the things they were talking about the Colorado opening, right? And what I found interesting that they named a couple of names from the FCS level. The coach from North Dakota State, what is it, Matt Ince? Ernst? Is that his name?
Yeah, Ints.
Ince. And Troy Taylor from Sacramento State. So if you lined up those two coaches and Coach Prime, could you give me the pros and cons or why they might be a better one of the three would be a better fit over Prime or Prime would be a better fit? Because I just found it interesting that they were listed as potential that Colorado will be interested in because I guess because of their record also. But I just wanted to see if you could give me a little bit more insight on that.
Yeah, so with them, it would just be the West Coast connection because you would have two West Coast guys who have won in West Coast states. And when you look at Taylor, he's a guy who potentially could be this year a two-time FCS Coach of the Year and has led Sac State in the Big Sky to, I believe, the streak's now at 19 straight games. I mean, they haven't lost a conference game since 2019. And he's doing it running a unique system, not necessarily getting the top talent, but he's done well in the transfer portal. Sac State this year landed, I believe, 2 4-stars out of the transfer portal from USC and one of those other Pac-12 schools. And Britt Vegan is a guy who has history at North Dakota State and has done his thing at Montana State. Came in year one. His quarterback transfers out right before the playoffs. He starts a true freshman in Tommy Millott and leads them to the national title. And then this year, Tommy Millott's out with injury. The backup quarterback, Sean Chambers, goes on with 17 rushing touchdowns in like 8 games. And they've were second in the country in rushing without their top 5 running backs to start the season. And their FCS All-American running back is just coming back right now for the playoffs. So I just think they're proven coaches in Western states and they've won big at the FCS level. And when you're looking at someone like Colorado, you're going to have someone who has connections in California, Montana, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona. And that would be the argument for them over Prom. And also, they're more proven than Prom just in terms of winning at the highest level at FCS.
Well, that's what I was curious about because there's so many coaches, especially out there, and then again there are other FCS coaches. And I was interested why there's those two, but again, you did make that point about them being on the West Coast, understanding that geography of recruiting and things like that. So that's why it kind of blew my mind when I saw them listed compared to other Power 5 coaches and coaches like Tom Herman and guys like that Bronco Mendenhall that were also named that again were Power 5 coaches. So I just found it interesting those two guys were also listed as potential replacements at the Colorado coach. So yeah, man, appreciate it. Great show. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Blue.
Hey, appreciate you, Mr. Campbell. I will also say this: with some of the lower, okay, I'll say this: the lower P5 options, so P5s that aren't brand names, they also are kind of looking at the success of someone like a Lance Leipold who came up from D3 and had to stop at Buffalo and what he's doing at Kansas. And also, let's not forget the coach over at Kansas State, Chris Kleiman, came from North Dakota State. He's one of the first coaches that kind of from North Dakota State to have large amounts. I mean, he has Kansas State on the verge of a Big 12 championship right now. And one of the games that they lost in conference, it was because they had a backup quarterback. And he's finally starting to kind of put in his system. And I think a lot of people are starting to look into that. And then also you can go back even further at like a Jim Tressel who came up from was the Youngstown State and led Ohio State to a national championship. So there is history of some FCS coaches having major success. And I think it's more those guys kind of fit the geographical footprint of a Colorado. And with Prime, you know what you're getting in terms of brand, recruiting, and things like that. But if you don't go with the Prime, I mean, I don't think you can go wrong with two coaches that have high level experience and success on the West Coast at two FCS locations, I would say. So I think that that would be the argument. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I know Nebraska announced today that they're going with Matt Rule, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if the contract is completely finalized, but it's looking like Matt Rule will be the next head coach at Nebraska. Now, there was a report yesterday that Colorado offered Prime a contract. The one person I talked to said it was somewhere around $5.5 to $6 million per year. I don't know the length or anything like that, and we'll just. I think we're just going to have to see what happens. But I know for Colorado, the one holdup would be, especially with the candidate like Coach Prime, Colorado wants to have an answer by the Monday after the SWAC championship, which means that Prime would have to be locked in before the Celebration Bowl. And I just don't see him leaving his team before the Celebration Bowl, and that would be the main holdup. But the offer is legit. It's just going to depend on, is he willing to lock that in? And like from what I was told, the ball's kind of in Prime's court. It's up to him. I don't know what's going to go on. I don't have any inside info from Prime's camp, but I did talk to some Colorado people, and the offer is legit. The interest is legit, and that's all I can give y'all is we'll see. Um, we'll see what happens. But I know Colorado does want to have a coach in place by the opening of the transfer portal for kids to actually go sign with programs and enter the transfer portal and things like that. So that's going to be the major holdup, I think, is that he's going to have to end up leaving or pulling some sort of double duty, kind of like Chris Kleiman did, where he accepted the head coaching job for Kansas State, was working at K-State, but still coached North Dakota State in the national championship. And that's kind of that would have to be the setup for Prime. And I don't me personally don't see that happening necessarily. But listen, as soon as I hear something, I'll let y'all know. That's how I'm gonna go about it. MSU has the best rushing game in the FCS and not one first team conference O lineman. MSU feels disrespected. Good luck to anyone in the playoffs playing them. I love it, Daniel. Listen, my all conference and all American teams are going to be dropping soon, so stay on the lookout for that. And Daniel, there are a lot of issues with some of the all conference, all American, and all conference teams I've seen. No one's dropped an all American list yet, but we're gonna rectify some of the snubs that I've seen on some of these all conference teams. Sac State was nothing before. Now they're a playoff team each year. Love the Youngstown running back. Yeah, I don't see it. I truly don't see it. He makes more than that from Barstool and Aflac. Yeah, and at the end of the day, guys, I don't think the offer is going to be as much about his salary and how much money he'll be making. It will be more about what his assistants and his recruiting budget and NIL and things like that. And I know a lot of the smoke of Prime to Colorado kind of got, it was almost like a fan to the flame with the speculation, is that right after the report came out about Prime getting the offer to Colorado, um, Colorado's president, like 20 minutes after the report came out about the offer to Prime, came out and said that Colorado is restructuring its transfer portal requirements. And so what um what that means is that Colorado's looking to lesser their academic standards and increase the amount of credits and the I don't know the word, decrease their strictness on what type of classes transfer to Colorado for certain majors. And so what they're doing is trying to say whoever we hire, whoever's being brought in, we want them to have kind of like a super highway to bring in as many transfers and a more diverse group of transfers that that we can help with their degree progress and things like that. So Colorado's doing everything they can to make sure whoever they bring in for the head coach is going to not have to really fight the behind the scenes academic things for a lot of the transfers. And so a lot of people just assume that, listen, we know what Prime can do in the transfer portal. And so a lot of people just kind of ran with the narrative that they're changing their standards in terms of credits transferring in and things like that for Prime. And that's kind of why the Colorado offer Prime rumors have really kind of taken off in the past so long. And I know I sent it to Ken Clark on his stream because he was talking about it. So I just wanted him to have the majority of information. But yeah, that's the latest. That's all I got. And like you guys said, like I tell you guys all the time, I'm not going to give you guys any information that I have not talked about with somebody, that I haven't confirmed, or that I haven't kind of verified. I'm just not going to be out here talking about information I have no clue about. So that's all I know, and that's as far as I can speculate on what's going on. And that's just what I was told from some people who have connections over at Colorado, man, including the 247 insider from over there. I believe they're Nike or Jordan, one of the two. Okay, Isaiah said Nike, but I don't know how long that contract lasts either. I have zero idea. Matt Rule, yeah, Matt Rule's going to probably, unless something major happens, Matt Rule's the new head coach at Nebraska. Chris, that was announced today by Chris Lowe, who is like pretty much the Woj of college football right now. JSU's better than Colorado. That's fair. My money on Deion staying one more year. Yeah, listen, I don't have an opinion on it, to be honest with you guys. Um, there's like this, and we can kind of get into this. There's this misconception I think people have because there I saw a lot of stuff on social media and things like that. People have to stop getting mad at reporters for doing their job. And I think fans can be emotional because listen, at Ole Miss about had a damn meltdown over reports of Lane Kiffin to Auburn, but the personal attacks that I've seen on people for just reporting the news or reporting for what their sources say and calling people just outrageous stuff, like, man, people got to put it all in perspective. I mean, everyone's got a job, and their job is to just report the news. Not like, you can't take what a reporter reports and say, oh man, that's how he feels, like, oh, he's pushing this agenda. It's just it's insane how like the personal attacks that I've seen on some reporters for just reporting what's going on. But then if they weren't reporting on the news, um, everyone would be like, why aren't you doing your job? It's it is crazy. That's just how I feel. You can't be out here calling people derogatory terms just for doing their job. That's just crazy to me. He said, "Hey man, that's on my first name. It's reserved for others like grandparents and such." It's just how it. Uh, let's see. One question: would you think the reports on him staying? They report on him staying as much as the reports of them trying to get him to leave. Um, I don't. I don't. Okay, that's this is part of the misconception is when no, there are no reports on him staying. If he stays, there's no news because he's got a contract. Like, I think that's the misconception is how do you report on news that isn't news? Like a coach staying or not, or like if he wasn't talking to schools, there'd be no report. Like, what do you want to people to do? Write an article every day is, hey man, not talking to any schools. Hey man, no news. Like there isn't any news to report if he wasn't talking to schools. So you can't write reports on things that are just not happening. I think that's the misconception is what would the article look like that you would want written of him staying? He has a contract. If he's staying, then he's staying. That's just like I don't think anyone has like an there might be people who have ulterior motives. I'm just saying we can't get mad at the media for just doing their job. The MEAC will always be around the 8. I don't know what that means. Um, who do you got for the Elon versus Furman game? I'll be at that game. I already made my prediction earlier in the show, Alan. I'm riding with Furman in a close one. I think that's probably one of the better matchups of the first round. But I got Furman by 3 this weekend over Elon. It's going to be a great game though, man. Let me know how the let me know how the atmosphere and environment is in that one. That one should be a good one, man. Furman has a solid fan base, and I love the area that stadium is in. So what happened to the coaches that are there? Are there? They all get fired. The kids that are starters, like the QB, get second string. Are you talking about just like where, like all the jobs that are open right now? Because like all the job openings. Okay, so okay, you're talking about Jackson State if it was there. It would just depend. V it so with a coaching change, what usually happens is the coach that so let's just okay, let's not even use Jack State as an example. Let's just say Mike Minter takes a job somewhere. So what Mike Minter usually would do if he took a job is he would take the staff that he would want to his new job. And so what usually happens in the interview process is the school, let's say he's interviewing for where do y'all want Mike Minter to go in this hypothetical scenario? Mike Minter's interviewing for Georgia Southern. And if in the interview, Georgia Southern would be like, well, Coach Minter, which assistants on your staff do you want to bring with you? And he would probably go through the list of who and why, and they would do a background and make sure that they would want those assistants to come with them. And he'd probably take whatever assistants that he wanted with them. And that's why you get these coaches that are quote unquote from the Saban tree, from the Kirby Smart tree, and you get these coaching trees. It's because they stick with that coach up until they get an opportunity elsewhere in terms of upward mobility for a coaching job. Then the next step would be the coaches who he doesn't take would probably wind up somewhere else in that kind of same role. Like a coach that Mike Minter has a relationship with would go pick them up, or they would get an offer from somewhere else. They wouldn't just get quote unquote fired. They would probably just go find an opportunity if they didn't go with the coach. That took them. In terms of players, it would just depend. Does the player have eligibility? Can they transfer again? Does the coach want to take them with them? Do they want to go to the school? V, that's also a big question. If a head coach takes a job at a school that the kid doesn't want to go to, or a state the kid don't want to play in, they'll probably just enter the transfer portal and go look for another opportunity, or see who the school that they're at hires and then play for that coach. So there's a lot of moving parts in terms of coaching changes. There's not like a general rule for everything. But in terms of coaches that are currently on staff, if the head coach leaves, he usually takes the assistant coaches that they want with them, unless it's a unique situation, kind of like the Auburn job. The coach who they hire is most likely going to have to keep Cadillac Williams unless he gets a head coaching job somewhere, and probably also a coach like Zach Etheridge. Um, Unless there's assistants that are super tied into the school, those coaches they might not have a choice to not have those coaches on their coaching staff, but that's very far and few between in terms of um, coaching changes. JSU Lady Tigers played. Oh man, I was hoping they won that game. I saw earlier, last time I looked at it, Roosevelt, it was a 2-point game. I was hoping they pulled that one out, but that's not a bad loss, man. That's a solid performance for them. If Coach Prom leaves, it would need to be this year, especially if we accept the assumption that Coach Prom is deeply invested in launching Shador's career at the next level. Let's put pressure on the SWAC commissioner to change the SWAC playoffs to include a 4-way game. The biggest holdup with that, Royce, would be there's two. Okay, so there's actually two, and the one holdup would be you would have to have another we would have to have two. You would have to have two postseason games approved by the NCAA again, Royce, because FCS schools and D2 schools aren't really allowed to have quote unquote bowl games. So they would have to get approval similar to what they had for the Heritage Bowl and the Celebration Bowl. And another thing is they would have to have legislature passed, if I'm not mistaken, that would allow D2 and D1 programs to face off in the postseason. Right now, that's not necessarily allowed, if I'm not mistaken. Like a D2 team can't play a D1 school in the postseason for like a bowl game. So that would be the two biggest holdups, but I don't know how long that would take to change in the grand scheme of things. But those are just two things you would have to think about, along with getting sponsors, locations, and things like that. And it would just be tough to convince someone that the D2 conference to, because at the end of the day, a lot of the D2 conferences like playing in the D2 playoffs. So could you convince them to go into this playoff? Is it better for them to play teams above their level, or would they rather go to the D2 playoffs and have a chance to compete? That would be some big questions in terms of that that layout. Let's see. Bro, that game was insane. Hell of a game on Thanksgiving night too. I loved it. A point about transferring now. He gives Shador 2 years to settle in and bolster his resume. I could not see him doing anything that would jeopardize Shador, seeing the value by the pros. So you have Jason Woodlock, Miak, Mike, and his brother Tito. Oh, bro, you are wild. Nick does not care. What are the rules of probably how does Shador follow? Without violent insults, coach can't talk. Bro, there's a rule against it. Shador can I mean, they understand that that's still his dad at the end. I mean, there was no hold up when he transferred to Jackson State or flipped from Jackson State to from what was it, FIU. It will be fine. Shador still can transfer. There won't be any hold up there. I don't think Royce. I don't think that'd be a big issue. Either way, Coach Prom has brought JSU back to a winning program. I trust Ashley will find a good replacement. That's fair. I'm just gonna. I would say this. I would say no one should worry until like something concrete comes out. There's always rumors, and then there's also the fact I don't know how many people have followed a lot of like coaching searches closely. What usually happens is this: if a school wants to get the media off their trail of who they're hiring, what they'll do is they'll float names out there, or the agent will float other clients out there to distract from the candidate that's really of interest in a lot of head coaching searches. So, and a good example would be Jimmy Sexton represents Lane Kiffin. So if Auburn was quote unquote hiring Lane Kiffin, he would float other candidates in his that are clients of his leverage for future contracts for them, but also to get the media sent off of his client who's actually trying to negotiate for the job. And so it's a lot covering coaching searches is a lot of trying to figure out if there's genuine interest or if candidates are just being floated out there because their clients, because of leverage, or because they're trying to get people off the scent of what's going on. But let's see. Can we get an episode in the near future that focus on what success would look like for teams leaving the NCAA and forming another entity? Also, still maybe playing NCAA teams. Yeah, man, I'll try to get some special guests on here to kind of look at that. There's a lot of moving parts with that. We might need a whole bunch of pieces to that one. That might be like a 2 or 3 parter, man, because you're talking about you got to look at the business side, you got to look at the political side, you got to look at the athletic side. I mean, there's academic. There's a lot of moving pieces there, but I'll see what I can get together. Imperial, I'll let you know on that one. I might have to get Dr. Conville and some people to come on here to talk about that one. But guys, I'm about to have to jump on the Blitz City podcast with my guy Kobe. FBS Fridays is about to kick off here in about 7-8 minutes. Me, my guy Kobe, my guy Clay, and also funny enough, Coach Carl Reed from Carl Reed will be on there from 247 Sports. I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to talking to him. But follow me over to the Blitz City podcast. And it's a blue when you transition, man. I'm hoping, hey, one day we'll get the call, but hey, this channel's always going to be here, man. I ain't leaving y'all, even if I get a big offer somewhere or opportunity. We're still rolling right here on the Bluebloods. But guys, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I'll be back Sunday night, round 1 recap. We're going to talk the Bayou Classic recap, and we're also going to talk a little bit about what happened with Alabama State at the Turkey Day Classic, where they collapsed against UAPB. But guys, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, the Blue Bloods are out.